Can you think of one of the worst things you have ever done? What were the consequences for your mistake? In our story today, we're going to hear about a time when David made a big mistake. Because of his sin, David had to pay the consequences. But thankfully, that is not where the story ended. Instead, God chose to show David grace, which leads to our big picture question. What is grace? Grace is when God gives us something we do not deserve. David was a great king and a man after God's own heart. With God's strength, he had defeated Goliath and established a great kingdom on earth. God even made a covenant with David and promised him that his kingdom would last forever. But David was not perfect. As we will see today, even David sinned and messed up. King David sent out Israel's army. David stayed in Jerusalem. One evening, David looked out from his palace and saw a beautiful woman named Bathsheba. Bathsheba was the wife of Uriah, one of the best warriors in David's army. David sent his messengers to get Bathsheba, and she came to David's house. Later, Bathsheba told David that she was going to have a baby. The baby was David's. David knew he had sinned, so he made a plan. He called Uriah home from battle, but Uriah did not think it was fair for him to relax at home while the other men were at war. Uriah slept on David's doorstep and refused to visit his wife. So David made a new plan. He instructed the leader of the army to send Uriah into the hardest part of the battle so he would be killed. David's plan worked. David took Bathsheba to be his wife, and she had a baby boy. But God sent Nathan the prophet to talk to David, and Nathan told David a story. A traveler came to a rich man who had many animals. The rich man did not offer his own animal. Instead, he took the poor man's lamb, the only lamb he had, and gave it to the traveler to eat. And this story made David feel angry. But you are the man, Nathan said. God had given David a position of great power, and David took what was not his. David realized he had sinned against God. Now, David was human, and just like every other human, he sinned. After David sinned, he tried to cover it up. It's never a good idea to try to cover up our sin. We cannot hide what we have done from God. So God spoke to David through the prophet Nathan, reminding David of what he had done. David realized his sin and asked for God's forgiveness. He repented of his sin and chose to turn back to God. But David still faced consequences for his sin. His baby passed away, and problems continued in his family for many, many years. But in the end, David chose to do the right thing and tried to live for God again. In the same way, God will forgive us of our sin when we ask. We do not deserve God's forgiveness, but God shows us grace and offers us forgiveness through Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. Praise God for Jesus' death and resurrection that brings us salvation. When David repented of his sin, God forgave him, but sin always comes with a price. God spared David's life, but David's son died. When we sin, we deserve death. But we can receive God's forgiveness because God sent his son, Jesus, to pay the price for our sin. Now let's take another look at our memory verse. Ephesians 1:7-8 says, "In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace that he richly poured out on us with all wisdom and understanding." Thank God for how he has poured out his grace upon each one of us. And I hope you will join us again next week as we wrap up our study on the life of David.